Jeffrey Young. Jeffrey's been senior editor for technology at the Chronicle of Higher Education. He's been covering a variety of higher education issues for much of his career, and I'm going to welcome Mr. Young.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you for basically letting me be part of this, and I'm very interested, of course, in hearing from all of you as well. But I'm excited to be helping to kick this off. As was said, I'm at the Chronicle of Higher Education. My name is Jeff Young. I'm the technology editor there. And so my perspective is a little bit different than a lot of the other speakers, and I'm hoping to offer kind of a view from a distance and what different players in this emerging area, which I usually say MOOC, even though that doesn't sound that great as a term, but instead of MOOC, but I know it's so new that we're all figuring out what this landscape is. But to me, covering education and technology for quite a while, I have to say I'm very sort of excited about this particular topic that seems to have come out of nowhere and seems to be moving very quickly. And I'm sure this must seem the same way to you all too, even to me watching it. But I will say that whatever happens, and of course we're watching whether it goes to all the dreams that people are talking about or whether some of the questions that are coming up win the day. It's a great story either way, but to me it already seems different that the conversations that I'm having with people at universities seem a little bit different than a few years ago. There seemed more willingness to kind of take on topics that might have been taboo a couple of years ago, about really asking tough questions about what is the university, what is it for, how does teaching work, should it work, what the standard status quo is that the best way? And of course there are many people making good arguments on both sides, and some people saying, the other thing about higher education, it's not known to be super fast moving, as many of you probably know, but also it's got tons of tradition, and so there's a reason and a value that people who want it to stay the same have too. And so it's just been an interesting time. I wanted to start off my talk today with starting at Epcot Center. I grew up in South Georgia, which is not too far from Orlando, so I grew up going on family vacations to Epcot. And those, whether you know it or not, I mean, the idea is this very futuristic place, right, where you go on rides like in this geodesic dome that's the symbol of this amusement park, but you're going, it's kind of a tour that kind of celebrates how technology is changing our lives. And I think there's kind of this promise that tech will improve everything and make things better. And in a way, I'm sure this group can appreciate that the kind of design and engineering and technology, are we going to re-engineer our world to be better? Through being smart and changing things. And so there are some things I think back, I don't know if anyone's ever been, how many people have gone to Epcot, if not? Yeah, so you go through this, which is called Spaceship Earth, and this one's focused on telecom and how things have changed from the Stone Age, like from caveman's day to now. And I went through this in the 80s or whatever, and when it was pretty new, and it was so exciting that there was going to be, some of the stuff they promised has actually happened. Like there will be teleconferencing with the grandparents will see via video chat the grandchild, and this was like no way. But honestly, I have a 2-year-old, and we absolutely do this video conferencing every week. So that happened. Other things, I think the part of one of the rides I remember, we had colonies in outer space and some things that haven't come yet. And so it's interesting, but some things have kind of come even more than suggested at this kind of futuristic place, and some things different or not at all. And so I think it's interesting. I feel like we're at this kind of exciting. There's been this exciting moment with MOOCs. Of promise, as I'll go over. And now this might seem like an odd segue, but the geodesic dome that Epcot has as its symbol is something that was invented by Buckminster Fuller, a designer who was a pundit in his day, a futurist, a visionary guy. If he were alive today, I know he would be giving TED Talks and we would all be listening to him, and he would have all these cool ideas. He was opining on everything from cars of the future to obviously buildings of the future, and he thought we'd all be living in geodesic domes by now. But there were some interesting ideas, and I think one thing that I didn't realize until recently was that late in his career, he actually talked a lot about the future of education and of higher education. And he had this idea that there would be interactive two-way television. He called it two-way television, and his vision was that that education would be the biggest beneficiary of this. And there would be, he gave a talk in 1962 that it was published as well. It's called Education Automation. And you kind of hopefully see where this is going. In a way, he never used the word MOOC, but there's a lot of ways in which he kind of sketched out a blueprint for the kind of things we're talking about at this conference. He said that children will be able to call up any kind of information they want about any subject, get the latest information with a little TV documentary on demand. It sounds like Wikipedia. There are even some videos starting to be on Wikipedia, but the idea. Now, he also talked a lot about universities. And he said this idea of lecturing is definitely going to be old hat. We're not going to do this anymore. This idea that these yellowing lecture notes are going to be delivered by the people over and over again. We'll record them, he said, and they'll give that basic lecture just once to a group, I love this, of human beings, including both experts and bright children and adults without any special training. And we will have this studio audience that will be a kind of focus group, and they'll refine these. And the other interesting thing is he says there will be a team of experts on education that would know the science of how best to teach. And so you would have these lectures and they'd be recorded, and then if anything changed, the prof would come back and re-record parts of it, and these experts would add the visuals, and it would basically be a team effort to build the most scientifically kind of perfect, rigorous, effective tool to teach, say, chemistry or physics. So, and he says that there's going to be this whole research opportunity and a kind of labs for how to educate better. That college now is kind of done on the seat of our pants. Why? His kind of idea was, well, of course, this will just be systematized. I mean, just like with factories that are routinely improved via science, or agriculture, or all kinds of things. So that was his idea. So, and there's his vision of a community with these geodesic domes. But basically, there are three basic premises that I think were really provocative at the time and are still somewhat provocative depending on who you're talking to. And one is then that teaching can be automated, right? I mean, even in a way, education automation was kind of meant to be punchy. It was meant to be two things that didn't go together necessarily, and that science can play a role in making education different to improve teaching. In other words, there could be this optimization, and that researchers are not always the best ones to deliver the lecture. He didn't make a huge point of this, but he talks about, maybe some people that are at universities are really good at doing research. They're not necessarily that great at teaching. So we'll get the good teachers to do this, and the other ones don't have to as much. They can use the videos. Okay, so we didn't get the two-way television, but we did get this internet, which is pretty good. In fact, some ways it's better. This is like an internet traffic map. But there's some things about the internet that he may not have thought of, but are really exciting. Now, of course, we're connected with laptops and mobile computers. But teaching on campuses has, until recently, and in many cases, still largely been done in the same way that's been done. So, for centuries and hundreds of years for sure, the model has pretty much stayed the same. Now, of course, we've upgraded to get these equipment like we have now, which is the PowerPoint slides and the audio, but it's still talking at a group of people. And so I joke that, is education going to be one of those things like jetpacks? This is a book I like a lot by a researcher, a robotics researcher actually, called Where's My Jetpack, which is kind of a humorous, cartoony look at all the things that were promised to us in science fiction and places like Epcot that never happened. That we just, we've been promised all these things that are going to happen, like the colonies in space. But the jetpack, he takes it as the symbol of the thing that has never happened. We're not anywhere near jetpacks, personal jetpacks. And I think he tongue-in-cheek is saying that's a bad thing. But if you think about it, it's probably pretty good that we didn't check our jetpacks at the door. If it was truly practical, or if we really were doing jetpacks, there could be all kinds of negatives I can imagine that would be sort of a nightmare, right, about personal jetpacks. Everywhere from the environmental impact to personal jets to the accidents and the danger and all this stuff. And in some ways, you could argue we're better off with the future we got rather than the future that some fun movies had. So education has kind of been in one of those jetpack modes, right? It's been, automating education has been talked about. And Buckminster Fuller's not the only one, of course. It dates back. Many technologies, it was talked about that, TV's early days, radio, there was distance education, and always there have been experiments, and they've gone, they've happened, but as far as changing the day-to-day university experience, they have not. So it's been kind of the jetpack of technology changing life. So then, 2011. Now this is only one example. There are a few things that happened. And some of the people speaking at this event can tell you about their own parts of this. But Sebastian Thrun, who is a university professor, Stanford University professor at the time, teaching artificial intelligence, decides to open up his course that he co-taught on artificial intelligence to the world. And I'm sure they were excited and wanted some people to come, so they thought somebody would come. But early days of it, 58,000 people signed up the day this article ran in the New York Times in 2011, in August, almost exactly 2 years ago. And then, interestingly, as soon as this article ran, I think it was on the front page of the New York Times, this number bumped up to something more like 160,000 students. I hope people realize that, I don't know, I guess we've heard this story before probably, otherwise it was kind of a gasp moment for a lot of us, even like me who cover these things, of like, are you sure there's all the numbers are, is there an extra zero? So this was an unusual eye-catching idea. And so, Sebastian Thrun, by the way, works for Google X, and he helped design the driverless car for Google. So if you've heard talk about other technologies we thought may never be automated, driverless cars are right up there as things that haven't come, but now all of a sudden seem like they might actually be possible. And so he's the same guy. He decided to try this self-driving education. Of course, now we know he's only one of a few people offering them. So he finishes the 160,000 student course, and he gets up and he has a talk about a year and a half ago, that says, after doing this, I can't just go back to Stanford and teach my puny 200-person class or a room like this. This is something that's we got to try. So he starts a company called Udacity, which is now offering MOOCs, so what is this? Let me back up a second. So what are these MOOCs or MOOCs? And I think most of you already know, you're here, so I'm assuming you probably have a lot of knowledge of this, but I think one of the things just to highlight that's different, they're massive open online courses, and what's different is that they're short web lectures. So in a way, like they're short little nicely crafted documentaries, video documentaries about a certain topic by a great professor, but they're also, unlike earlier lectures that were free online, they are not just an hour-long copy of what's been delivered traditionally at colleges. They try to strip out some of the tangents and diversions and focus topic by topic and try to make them more like 12 minutes instead of 50, and make them much more kind of searchable, findable, trackable. And then the other idea that's really key for these new style of online course is that there is homework, that you expect the students to do work. They're not just going to watch lectures and that's it. And then the work will be graded either automatically by this guy, or actually a computer program, or by peers, by other people on the internet. And I'm sure you guys have heard about the peer grading experiments for humanities courses. So you can grade each other's poetry, follow a rubric. Did you do this kind of very set assignment the right way? And tap the wisdom of the crowd. And if you have 4 or 5 people grade each assignment, the idea is the top scores and the bottom scores get dropped out. Kind of like scoring at the Olympics or something, and the final score is somewhat close to what a professor could do. So the idea being, again, scale. So that you can have one professor teach 160,000 people. And then the other thing is, to get the scale, you have to make it free, or that's the idea. And so the mind-blowing, eye-popping 160,000 is possible if you make it free, and then everyone shows up. And then the other thing, and I think this is a really key, I think without the free, none of this, and without the internet, none of this would be happening, because the truth is, education is hard, and learning new things is hard. And you always hit stumbling blocks, no matter if you have the best professor on the planet teaching you. And so the internet gives people the chat room so they can go figure it out. If they didn't understand a course taught by one of the best lecturers in the world, they can go online and say, like, anybody else get the gist of that? Let me see. And so they get an answer from a peer or somebody else who might also actually have a lot of knowledge, and there's this crowd kind of function that can help save the day, or even a Google search. And so the answers are not all tied up in this one great man or woman who's at the stage. You guys know this, I think, but I think it's very worth noting at this conference that the people driving the biggest and fastest growing experiments, some of whom are in this room, are going to be at this conference, are people in computer science departments, are engineers. They are people with engineering as their training, their mindset, their practice, and and I think that's no accident. So we have, Andrew Ng and Daphne Kohler, the co-founders of Coursera, Anand Agarwal from edX, Sebastian Thrun, as I mentioned, from Udacity, all from computer science departments, and all no accident. So here's a larger world that we're tracking. So the Chronicle of Higher Education, where I work, we had a lot of fun with this a couple weeks ago. We put together, this is a classic journalism follow the money chart, right? Now I know there's a lot on here, and I'll make the slides available later. There's too much to go into right now, but it's fun to look at, I think, as somebody even covering this. You see these different amounts of money, and so this is all the crazy ecosystem that's grown up, a very vibrant ecosystem, I should say, that's grown up very rapidly around MOOCs. And so you see at the center of this are these places. I talked about Khan Academy, of course, is also one that has done a lot of K-12, but is doing some other similar videos and now assignments. And so you have the nonprofit world, like the Gates Foundation, dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into these efforts. You have universities, of course, Harvard and MIT putting in 60 million to start edX, many other universities investing tens of millions of dollars, and also, of course, their time and their brand to try this. And then companies like Udacity and Coursera coming up and also getting money from venture capital. We've never seen this much venture capital money into education technology startups as in the last couple years. And I think this is, again, tens of millions of dollars pouring into these efforts. So these are not just springing up totally out of nowhere, just like anything, they're being backed. And so these engineers and computer scientists are at the center, but a broad world is definitely backing and cheering on this vision. So I'm going to talk, I can't go into all those different players, but I did want to talk for 4 key groups that I think this audience in particular hopefully will find interesting, and just a couple key things that I think set the stage for a discussion that you guys are going to have here at your great conference. One is administrators of colleges, professors, of course, a key player, policy leaders, and I define that pretty broadly, and students. You can't leave them out. And what I'm interested in is both looking at some of the big dreams and some of the big questions that are coming. Because, like I said, my job as a journalist covering this is not to cheer on or not. It's a great story either way, but we're very interested in the questions being raised and the hopes and the kind of challenges that are trying to be met. So with administrators at colleges, which many of you I believe fall into this category. I think, so I'm curious at the questions I hope you will add to my list, but this is a tangential one. I mean, as a quick sort of summary for you, is we just did at the Chronicle of Higher Ed a special issue that we now do every year on profiling 10 top tech innovators. That's got a tongue twister. 10 innovators and in higher education with some big ideas that might be shaking things up, that seem to be getting traction. And of course, MOOCs are in there, and several people were doing things around MOOCs. And one of the people we focused on, though, was really had a bigger conception of how they would work. And it's Mohammed Kayomi of San Jose State University, who is the president there, an engineer by training, and comes from business. So he was somebody who was an engineer for a firm for a few years before he got into higher ed administration. So he is very much unapologetically endorsing a vision of borrowing from companies and learning from the world-class companies of the world, and engineering college with some of the taking tips from the Apple Store or Walmart, he mentions a lot. And he talks about what he liked about Walmart is that Walmart is obviously like continually using technology, he says, to innovate and make their stores more efficient and their whole supply chain, and everyone knows, read about this. But then he also says that they've also kind of built an online store that is very powerful, and that they're using the web to do e-commerce, and that they haven't gone out of business on their stores because they're doing e-commerce, that they're doing both, and that he thinks the universities should follow that kind of idea, that there will be customers that will never ever use the online version, but there are some people that will only use the online version, never go to your stores, or use both interchangeably. And so he has these white papers that I can put up links to some of these things that we've written about, where he kind of sketches a vision of a kind of retooled, re-engineered public university that might use some of these MOOCs and technologies. And one of the key parts of it, I'll just quickly summarize what I think he's talking about the most prominently, which is, one is an experiment with MOOCs from edX, where they're kind of flipping the classroom. They're using, I believe, MIT lectures, very much the way Buckminster Fuller would have loved, and then teaching them with an on-the-ground professor at San Jose State. So there's a human in the room, but the homework is watching the great videos. The discussion in class and activities are centered around not just the rote information, but something else. So that's the idea. And then obviously, like potentially down the road is an idea of maybe lowering costs or like changing the role of the faculty member over time if you start to move in this idea in this way. And then the other key partnership and experiment is to try to partner, in this case with Udacity, to offer options for students even before they get to campus, so that they might spend less time at campus. So he was basically suggesting that maybe the first year of college could be done before ever stepping foot at the campus. And you can imagine that might save the student a lot of money. Maybe during high school, during their senior year, they take these free courses, and maybe they pay a slight fee to the university to get credit, and then they get sort of a low-cost, quick, accelerated entry into higher education. This way, and of course California is going through a large budget crisis, as many of you know, and so the idea is if you can get more students through without adding new campuses, that would be a huge win in the state system in California. And the idea, I'm sorry, I wanted to mention of this other model, what's really radical in this, even though it sounds like the same idea as before, what's really interesting about it is the willingness about both of these really, a willingness to partner with a company or an outside vendor to offer parts of higher ed, right? To offer parts of teaching, rather. And that is something that is interesting and different, that, you know, colleges have outsourced the dining hall and other things, but we've certainly haven't seen colleges doing as much of saying, okay, part of the teaching videos will be supplied by, we'll license them from another provider, maybe a company, maybe edX. So obviously, the people behind this vision, and obviously San Jose State is just one of the places doing these ideas. Other people are experimenting. There are challenges that everyone knows going into this. It's not like people don't recognize that there are issues. One of them is a business model, right? Still, if things are free, and I got a lot of these questions in the first stories we wrote. Free courses sounds great. Who's going to pay for it? It's free. So it's a great question, and I think that we've been trying to lead the charge to find out the answer. We've FOIA'd, we've used the Freedom of Information laws in the United States to grab a couple of the contracts, to publish them on our website, and try to get to the bottom of what happens when the university works with one of these companies. What have they promised? What does the financial system work? And you know, I think the answer we're finding is that they are still working all this out, right? It's not an answered thing. A lot of the contracts have these enormous escape clauses. It's almost like, it's like the escape hatch for from a James Bond film or something, where everyone can just leave at the drop of a hat if things are not going well. And I think it's because everyone realizes it may be a different model a year from now or 6 months from now even. And so people don't really know, but I think there's a lot of interesting challenge here, right? Because if you do go on without a plan long enough, somebody's got to pay some money to make it be free, I guess. And then another big one, I'll explain this, is cheating or plagiarism and or gaming the system, right? Online, people are very crafty, and if it's something that seems fun to get or interesting or valuable to get, say, for a job, people will figure out ways to tweak it or game it or fraudulently obtain it. This is something, and I don't mean to pick on Coursera at all, but a source of mine, a student, noticed this, where if you go on Coursera, has anyone signed up for a course on this one, right? Like it's a free course. Anyone can go on there, you sign up for a course, you can make your name whatever you want. So I put it, my name is Jeffrey Young, right? But then after you get and you pass a course, this is from Penn, it's on mythology, you can at any time change your name in the system to anything you want. So this woman, her name is Helen in real life, but she changed it to Batman and Robin and then reprinted her certificate just for fun, right? To prove that she could prove anybody. She could put, and of course Batman and Robin is funny, but she could put her son's name who didn't take the course. She could put, you see how this could be a problem. But I will say, like I say, I'm not picking on Coursera. In fact, they know this. They've already issued a system that if you pay for a certificate, there's a kind of proctored version, a signature track that I'm sure Andrew might talk about. But if you pay for the certificate, then this is locked down and you can't just change it to Batman and Robin. So this is just kind of the version of the certificate that is not, there's a lot of fine print on these that sort of say, there's even more on the screen that didn't fit, that says like, this certificate does not prove that this person is actually Batman and Robin, and we don't know who they are, and we don't know for sure if they ever took this stuff, but they say they did. So there is a sense that these are things that have to be solved, is proving who you are. And so there is now a system where you have to hold up your ID and prove that you're you, and your name is more validated. And some of the providers now make you go to a testing center for the exam. So the other challenge, and of course another player in all this, is professors. So I think in the introduction it was mentioned that San Jose State has recently seen a little bit of pushback to the vision that I mentioned that the president there is laying out of like copying Walmart. Well, specifically the Walmart comment that was in the article we wrote got a bit of a blogger commentary on the internet, and especially from some professors at San Jose State who really didn't like the idea that their university president was planning to turn their university into Walmart, right? It's not something that rings particularly positive to a lot of professors who don't want colleges to become like businesses and see the commercial world as something that should be kept separate, like I mentioned, the traditions of higher ed. So there was a group in the philosophy department at San Jose State that issued an open letter just a few weeks ago that we have on our website. You can find it elsewhere online, that they had an open letter to one of the professors, Michael Sandel from Harvard. Michael Sandel has been teaching a course at Harvard. This is this is a famous course. Everyone at the institution, is sort of a lot of undergraduates take it. It's called Justice. And he offered it to the world. Now, I believe anyone here could go take it for free on edX, I believe. And so the professors of the philosophy department said, they wrote a letter kind of open to him, but it really is not just to him. It's really to the university administration. And it says, we don't really like this vision, this Epcot version of the university of the future. We don't think that this idea, I'm not big into reading long quotes, but so I do refer you to the letter, but basically saying we think he's a great professor, but we believe that having a scholar teach the audience in person is superior to having those students watch a video of another scholar engaging his or her students. And so you really have what is, of course, not too surprising, of somewhat of a backlash starting by some professors about, is this vision, this long-term vision, even if some of the pilot experiments are sort of benign, you might say, and even they might admit, then where is this leading? And are we all going, is this ride headed in the right direction? Now, at the Chronicle, we did, just a few months ago, we decided we'd like to talk to the professors who have taught a MOOC. There was that raise of hand if anyone taught a MOOC. Obviously, it's a pretty small group of people right now. We found over 200, and we got over 100 of them to reply to our survey. So we thought that was pretty good. So we had over 100 people that have taught a MOOC tell us various things about what they thought of this experience and what they, now obviously they're probably prone to like it, you would think, they taught one. But so they did say, by and large, that it was worth the hype. And of course, that's a pretty broad statement, but I think all of us know the hype that's going on, so that's actually kind of a tall order. You know, is there something really big going on, or is this just some sort of flash in the pan, or some nice outreach that's just kind of a small thing? And so they did, 79% said this is big. But, so I'll come back to the survey in a minute. But, you know, you also have a lot of professors that are very involved, that are leading these efforts. Obviously, I mentioned those companies were started by professors. edX was started by professors. These are professors leading it. So it's not just that they're being forced, somehow MOOCs are being forced on professors. I don't mean to suggest that at all. But, you know, certainly not every professor agrees. But this is one extreme case that I thought is worth noting. Whether people know this or not, there's a blog by these two economists at George Mason University. And it's very popular. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of readers of this blog about economics, because these economic blogs do quite well. And it's called Marginal Revolution, the blog. And then they started Marginal Revolution University without really the participation of their university. They just did it. They just went out and made their own university with a MOOC. And they are teaching, their first course is on developmental economics, economics in the developing world. And they have a lot of the lecture videos, like I said in the beginning, and the assignments. And they made it with a little bit of programming help, very quick and cheap, and they set it out there, and now they got their own university. And it raises questions about, so there's some ways in which professors might be able to break out and become their own kind of mini institution, or moonlight as their own university. And whether they do with that or through Coursera, it's interesting to note that this is Tyler Cowen, again, who's one of the people who does this blog and does this university. Tyler Cowan teaches, this is his house, this is his living room, that's his classroom for his MOOC, where he just voices over some slides that he has on his iPad. And he sits at his iPad on his couch and he records his lecture videos and he cranks out a couple a week, and he can make this thing in his spare time. So the university of the future is kind of maybe different. However, of course, there's a lot of different ways this might shape out. So back to the survey that we did. Why do these professors do it? So some motivations for the professors that we heard was, of course, building their own personal brand in a lot of ways, wanting to be seen as the key in their own discipline. Some of the same reasons you might do a textbook or try to speak at all the big disciplinary meetings. And also to be why people are public intellectuals, why you want to go out and do a TED Talk and really get your ideas out to a broader audience. And that's kind of some of the same thing we heard, 34% were in that camp. But there's another big challenge that the survey revealed. And a lot of the university professors that had done this said that it took longer than they thought. There was a big kind of disconnect between the time they budgeted for it and the time it took. Over 100 hours was typical for how long it took to make the lectures. And some of these are 6-week courses. They're not 16-week courses. So we heard again and again how much time it took. And also that their university was not recognizing the time. And so, in other words, their university was saying, that's nice, glad you're doing it, but they weren't giving them a release time always from teaching. And they weren't necessarily, who knows, it's early days, but these professors worried that it wouldn't be counted when they came time for promotion or tenure. What if they spent all this time? Oh, and also, so 100 hours building it, and then 10 to 15 hours every week while it's running, just chasing down little things, fixing things, responding to things in the discussion room. So, if you're teaching 160,000 people, you got a little bit of work on your hands. So, that said, even the people that took our survey, again, 100 people that had taught a MOOC, so they signed up to volunteer to teach one, when we asked them, do they think it's actually worth credit at your university? Do you believe it should deserve formal credit? The vast majority said no. And that's interesting. They were very enthusiastic, and they thought their students in the MOOCs did learn. So they're not saying their MOOCs were bad. But the question was, it is as good as what was being delivered on the ground at their institution. And their thought was, it's not quite up to that. So now that all could change too. But these are questions, serious questions that some of the professors had. So there's dreams the professors have, some of them personal, professional dreams. And then there are challenges for the institution and for the professors in actually being able to do it. Now, the third group I'll just talk about very quickly is people outside of higher ed. And again, this talk is largely focused on the US. I know there might be slightly different situations in other countries, but I know the most about the US, so I'll stick with that. Now, of course, he's not really a policymaker, but Bill Gates is at the, I'm going to click this while I talk, if you bear with me. Bill Gates, as the co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, oh, it's not online. I will click this, and if it doesn't work, I'll just tell you what he says. So I got to sit down with Bill Gates last summer and ask him some questions about what he saw as the key issues with technology in higher education. And one of the things, of course, he did talk about MOOCs. His foundation gives now hundreds of millions of dollars to higher education projects. And so he's certainly a player himself. But I think he also has the ear of policymakers and talks to a lot of people. I'm going to wait a minute. If this doesn't work, like I said, it's a short clip. I can summarize what he says, but let me try this one quick second.
Okay. You're patched in.
I'm patched in, guys. Is it loading? There he is. Okay, can we get some sound?
Yeah.
Great. I'm going to reset this, so don't worry. Yeah, that's not too flattering. Is the sound? Somebody tell me when we're live here. Go ahead. Okay, great.
Very good metrics of what is their value added. If you try and compare to universities, you'll find out a lot more about the inputs. This university has high SAT scores compared to this one, and it's sort of the opposite of what you'd think. You'd think people would say, well, we take people with low SATs and make really good lawyers. Instead, they say, well, we take people with very high SATs, and we don't really know what we create, but at least they're smart when they showed up here. And so maybe they still are when we're done with them. So it's a field without a kind of clear metric that then you can experiment and see if you're still continuing to achieve it.
So it sounds very commonsensical and benign that, I mean, in a way, he's looking at this from, bear with me for a second. He's looking at this from an outside perspective. He's not in higher education, but he's interested in sort of this vision of how it could be more efficient, this engineered vision. And again, he's somebody in computer science, right? Coming in and thinking this could be better. But I think what he represents and what he is kind of saying there is actually a pretty provocative, potentially challenging thing for everyone in this room and for a lot of higher ed folks, is basically where are the metrics for how good you are at what you do, engineering schools or universities, even if you're at the top, right? I mean, I think there's been as he said, there's been this kind of pass given that these top-ranked universities clearly do a good job. And many people still believe that, of course. But what he's kind of saying, where's the number? Where are the numbers? Where are the proof? And many other sectors of the world have numbers. And so the question, and they've done a lot of work, his foundation in K-12. And in K-12, there are a lot of these high-stake tests where people, there are numbers, right? These tests, either the people as they go through the grade levels, if they don't do well on the test, we read about it in the local paper and the school is failing. If they do well on the test, then the school is doing great and they get more money. So we have a system that in higher ed has been kind of given a pass. And you know what, a lot of people would argue and continue to argue against any metrics, that there shouldn't be metrics. And so I have no opinion on this myself, but the idea that there is a talk within the outside realm and perhaps a growing kind of question about accountability for higher education, I think is one that's worth thinking about. And my colleague, just to give a quick plug to my colleague Jeff Salingo, who is it's like kind of an editor-at-large at the Chronicle of Higher Education. He just has a book out in the last couple weeks called College Unbound. It's not focused only on technology, but it talks a lot about these trends that this fits into. And his take, and he's somebody that's been at the Chronicle for a long time, but for the book, he really talked to a lot of policymakers outside of the usual people we talk to at the Chronicle, which is people, professors and administrators. But he talked to a lot of people, and in the book, and he sort of takes a little advocacy point himself. I don't endorse it or not, but he sort of talks about how he sort of thinks that administrators at universities should have their feet held to the fire a little bit. And whether you like it or not, in this country, in the United States, 29 out of 50 states have, in the last 5 years, had a large drop in the amount of state funding by the state taxpayers to what they're doing. And so what you see is a question and a potential decrease in the amount of support from the policy realm, from state universities at state higher education, and really I think from the questions from places that had been giving to higher ed without asking some of these questions about how things are going. And so I think all this plays into MOOCs, because if you look at the San Jose State University I mentioned earlier, the governor of California is very interested and has been involved with encouraging those pilot projects with Udacity. And so the policymakers are very much talking in similar ways to what Bill Gates is saying there, and saying, show me the numbers, or show me how we can make it more efficient. So it's a pressure, it's a force that might be coming in greater numbers. And then, Jeff Salingo, my colleague, argues that these things have been ignored by a lot of colleges for a long time, and that there have been other past fads or online education. A lot of the elite universities didn't do much with online education early on, even though places like the University of Phoenix and many state universities did do some online learning for a fee, and it was a little bit more mirrored on what was done in a classroom. But he's saying that you can't just ignore these forces, he argues, that higher education cannot hold off those forces of technological and economic change much longer. And so this policy pressure, this kind of outside world banging in, is something that I think in the US is certainly getting louder. And a last group, but of course, again, not least, right? The students should get a say. So I've been trying to interview students who are taking these MOOCs. about why they do it, right? I mean, it's especially when they're not getting a certificate. If I go around campus at a place like this, I can ask why they're doing college, but I think we all know it's like if you get a Caltech diploma, that's going to open some doors for you. You can get a job. I think it's really unknown whether taking Andrew Ng, who's in the room and is going to speak next, taking his class online for free with no certificate, with a certificate but no official credit, what does that get you? Well, this student is one of many that actually ordered t-shirts up for fun that says, I am an expert in machine learning, Andrew Ng has declared it so. And so there's a pride and they're excited and they did it for fun. And a lot of the students that I interviewed already had a college diploma, right? They weren't doing it because they were in some remote village and they've never had higher ed before. They knew higher ed, they knew the drill. And so they were very comfortable in this lecture, homework, I'll keep on task, I can do this mode. And so they got some continuing education for free. Many of them were very, and the professors are rock stars. People were gathered around. I don't want to embarrass Andrew, who's here, but man, I was impressed. It was like I was at a concert. I went to this cookout that Coursera had for their students, and anyone could show up for free and get a burger and meet Andrew and Daphne and some of the other professors. And they were gathered around like it was Mick Jagger. It was, and they were like, let's talk to this guy. He taught me machine learning. I want to meet that guy. So there's this interesting, but a lot of them were not there because they'd never had any higher education. And so that question is, I know a lot of the people that started into MOOCs wanted to reach new audiences. They wanted to get to people that aren't going to college. And so there's been an interesting move in the last few months of different experiments that have kind of changed a little bit. And there's even an article that we wrote in the Chronicle this morning that my colleague wrote about the latest announcement from Coursera, which you might hear about, so I won't get into it too much, but of working with state universities and doing something a little bit closer to what I was mentioning with San Jose State, doing something where existing students, but also students who may not be able to afford, or new students, to kind of reach out to them and give them real credit. I say real. Who knows in the future? Maybe that t-shirt will be enough to get you a job, but it's a changing landscape. So the students, they wanted to learn skills, and some of these computer science skills, if one of the students told me, well, if I can make an app, I'll get a job. But I don't know how to make an app, so I took this course online. And as long as I can make the app, that's the key, and it doesn't matter. No one's going to ask me whether I got my Stanford certificate, or they might. But let's say it's a community college that's not as familiar, or versus just taking this course online. If they can show they did it and made an app themselves, then they said that'll be enough. So there are certain fields that in engineering, computer science, that may be able to reach out to more people. And a lot of the students said, when I asked, is this as good? Are you learning as much as you remember learning when you were at a college? And most of them said yes and no, that it was enough if they did a lot of work. If they really put their mind to it and stopped their lives, which is hard to do, right? We're all busy. And really worked hard and read extra material and did that. It was possible to learn as much in a class like this, but that it wasn't automatic, and that often they found themselves just kind of doing the minimum to get through, to get their certificate and put Batman and Robin on it just for fun. And they weren't necessarily getting as much out of it, but they could. So there's a motivation issue, and there's a higher dropout rate in some of these, as some of you have heard, that a lot of people that sign up don't make it all the way through, and some of them just sign up because they're curious. So there's an issue there. So I was told that I kind of only had about this much time, and I want to make sure there's time for questions. So I hope this is kind of a sketch of, I wanted to mention one of the other dreams. One of the students really didn't like their undergraduate and said they'd rather have Andrew Ng's class and other free classes, and that the universities could replace their first 2 years and just do MOOCs. But other people told me that was a horrible idea and they were scared of that. So there's no one answer to any of these questions. Different students have different hopes and dreams, different professors, different administrators, and certainly policymakers have their views. But what is becoming very interesting as I cover this, and I think you guys all know this from having to implement these things yourself, you must know more than I do about this, but just the very challenging environment of making these dreams a reality and trying to take this idea that's been around since the earliest days of recorded media, and then on through the decades, as something that could really change higher education. And is this a jetpack, or is this something that we're going to have as the standard in the future? So with that, I will give a quick plug to the Chronicle. All of our technology coverage is actually on the free part of our site, which people may not realize. So even if you're a non-subscriber, if you go to our site, you can get to all the MOOC stories. And so we have a page that I'll put up a link somewhere so you can get to it. But it's called What You Need to Know About MOOCs, where we have a kind of primer on it, and we have every story we've written. This is an older, we've updated it even today. And so you can get all the coverage we've done, for better or for worse, including opinion pieces. And you'll see in there, some people accuse us of being pro and some people con. You can prove either one if you look at these, because there are opinion pieces that say it's the devil and some that say it's the best thing ever. So we're just reporting on it, and you'll find, I hope, a lot of useful information there. And at that, I'll just open it up to questions, and thanks everybody for listening. I'm excited to talk to you. I didn't mention Georgia Tech's experiment, which is very related, but I know you're speaking, so I figured I wouldn't steal your thunder either.
Thank you. Be here tomorrow. Anyway, Jeffrey, I think you did a fantastic job, really and truly. I think I agreed with everything you said. And I have just what I think is a clarification and
Great.
a question. The clarification is when you ask the professors whether these courses will be valid for credit in their institutions,
Yes.
It is not a fair interpretation, because I can tell you for Georgia Tech, none of our MOOCs, all through Coursera, are offered or designed from the beginning to be courses for credit. Very, very, very few. I think there are 3.
So you would have written the question differently.
I would have written the question
Fair
quite
enough,
different.
okay.
So I think that is you're asking the question, they gave you the right answer, but you're interpreting it a step beyond.
I see.
I think.
Interestingly, we did this before we knew of any of these experiments. This was in March, I think. But yeah, we might have asked it differently even now.
Yeah, the question, and it goes to Andrew also, I think the announcement of Coursera yesterday relative to the state universities, and for disclosure purposes, I am in the educational board of Coursera.
Great.
So I've seen the debate going back and forth and the concerns and the issues, and also Georgia is part of that system.
Right. The
but
University of Georgia, right?
No, the
Georgia
whole
Tech is?
university, the whole state
Great.
is now signed on as a potential consumer of some of these products, including Georgia Tech's, and we have been working with them a little bit on that. But the implications of that are very big, and hence the deep discussions and the fears and the threats and all these things. Can you expand? Maybe Andrew will also get to it in his talk. But how do you see it?
So I'm sorry, just to make sure I understand your question. How do I see the concerns, or how do I see
the difference between a system signing on versus individual institutions providing content for a population at large? There's a significant difference in that.
Well, I guess, and I have been surprised at the speed, at every turn, of the speed at which some of these ideas have evolved, right? We can't keep up. We're doing our best at the Chronicle to cover this. But my understanding is this is a big difference, a kind of a potentially game-changing. If you look at something like MIT's OpenCourseWare project, are people familiar with MIT's giving away their free lecture videos and some notes from every class? They've been doing this for over a decade. And so obviously this won a lot of goodwill, a lot of coverage in the New York Times front page as well. But it didn't change, it didn't really transform things. And I think MIT would admit that. That's not a, and in a way, that was not their intent either. They were trying to help high school teachers in developing countries develop their curriculum. And I think they may have succeeded in some of those different goals. But their goal was not to educate those students on the ground in any country or in any university. And so, but I think you're right. What it seems to be moving to now is to, if you have state universities kind of signing on to these consortiums and potentially saying we might grab lecture videos from Georgia Tech, or Caltech might use Georgia Tech, or something like that, you might use, or community colleges might teach. There was an interesting experiment we wrote about at Mass Bay, a community college in Massachusetts, that is experimenting as well with edX courses. And the students there at this 2-year college, they wanted both the credit and the certificate from MIT. They didn't just want to get credit. which they could already get credit for 150 bucks a class. What they wanted was very exciting, was the credit from Mass Bay and another certificate that said, I got it from MIT. MIT designed the curriculum. And so this opens up, could be a potentially radical shift. And it opens up both opportunities for a place like Georgia Tech potentially to have a revenue stream to help support and fill in money from, if the state's not going to give Georgia Tech as much money, then maybe that would be a way. Or it also just kind of it potentially makes that kind of vision I was sketching at the beginning, that I was trying to sort of quickly sketch what I understood Buckminster Fuller's vision, but it almost gets more at that really is kind of, and someone else mentioned there's kind of incentives in those models for universities. If they're going to pay to license it, they're kind of going to want to use it if they bother to pay the money. And so it really does create an incentive to use it in those classrooms and really change the way teaching is done.
You said something that I think should be reemphasized.
Okay, sure.
They wanted the MIT certificate.
Yeah.
There's a branding issue, and some of the valid concern of many is that this may, rather than creating a flat playing field, in fact is polarizing between the elite
What do you think about
and the
that?
others.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. This is a huge point that we're covering.
I think there's some truth to that. And that I don't know how it's going to come out, honestly. I do not know. I have
figure it out by tomorrow and tell us when you speak. Yeah.
Well, tomorrow is another day, like you know, in this business. But it is a real issue because those brands and the Caltechs and the MITs and hopefully the Georgia Techs also have
Absolutely.
a brand name with power.
Yes.
And that is what causes concern in system-wide activities, right? That's what some of our colleagues in Georgia Perimeter College will be concerned about.
Well, and I know that I talked to one of your faculty members, and I know there was a vibrant debate within the computer science faculty at Georgia Tech about whether to do this experiment that's also trying to offer MOOCs there and offer a computer science degree. So I think you're seeing a lot of very smart discussion and a very interesting discussion play out. We'll be watching that. Thanks.
Any more questions? Because I think both of the issues that you raised may be addressed in the next, and then even the next talk. Any more comments?
Yeah.
So I'm Humphrey from Shanghai General University. Thank you very much for your interesting topics. So my question is, actually I think this is the MOOC will have a great impact for educations. So also the MOOC will raise, and we call a flipped classroom mode.
Yes, the flipped classroom.
Yeah. What's your comments of the flipped classroom mode? Yeah.
I think that is a good one. I'm glad you highlighted that. So another idea is this: even if it's all of your own university's production, the flipping the classroom. Let's say I'm teaching a course and I wanted to have my lectures. I record my own lectures and I maybe show that as homework, and have the homework be watching those videos. And again, I could carefully hone those and make them perfect, or hope near. And then the students watch that for homework, and then in the class time, the people are in the room together, which is obviously the most expensive time, right, from the university's point of view. Then that might be done something different, more hands-on experiments or some activities. And so you basically have the lectures taped and as a starting point. And so this flipped classroom is often called, of having the video lectures as homework and flipping kind of what's expected in the classroom. And so you get away from having this lecture model in the classroom. I think, like I said, I think it's exciting because it raises the big question of like, is the lecture a really crummy way to teach? That's the question that it raises. And I think that's an exciting question. I think obviously some lectures, we've all had some that are good and some that are bad. And so there's maybe not one answer, but the question is, can you make a more consistent product or delivery based on a flipped classroom than you can with the traditional lecture model? And again, I think one of the reasons I love this beat and I love writing about this issue is because I don't claim to have the answers, but I think I'm glad you highlighted it, because the flipped classroom is something I'm hearing about a lot. I'd be curious to hear how widespread people are talking about it on your campuses. And people are intrigued, and I think at the heart of it is a kind of nagging feeling that maybe the teaching could be better. Maybe, even if it's an excellent university, and even if the professor is pretty good at what they do, could it be a little better even? Because students today want to be hands-on, I'm told, or You know, there are different expectations by some employers. And so is the old way working as well? And again, I think it might differ by discipline, it might differ by university. So it's one of those things that gets nuanced, but they're interesting questions.